Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving straight into H.L. Peacock's sweeping look at modern European history. We're going to see exactly how 2 centuries of absolute chaos, brilliant innovation, and devastating conflict literally shaped the modern world. You know, if you've ever wondered how an entire continent went from being ruled by absolute monarchs in these glittering palaces to being completely divided by concrete walls and barbed wire, well, you are definitely in the right place. We're unpacking the years 1789 to 1980, tracing what we like to call the pendulum of power. Think about that massive shift for a second. European history over these 191 years, it is absolutely not a straight line of progress. It's actually more like a giant, swinging pendulum. We're looking at a continent that swings wildly between radical, sometimes incredibly violent change, and this desperate, white-knuckled desire for order and stability. And as you'll see, every single time that pendulum swings a bit too far one way, the pushback is just as fierce.
Now, to make sense of all this complex history without getting totally lost in the weeds, we've broken this explainer down into 4 pivotal eras: revolution and empire, industry and nationalism, the Great Collapse, and finally, the Iron Curtain. So let's just jump right into the first one.
Era number 1, revolution and empire.
It's crazy to see just how fast this escalation builds. In 1789, the Estates General brings these massive democratic hopes, everyday people literally demanding a voice. But then, within just 4 short years, that completely unravels into the pure paranoia and the bloody guillotine of the Reign of Terror. And out of that sheer chaos, Napoleon Bonaparte steps up and crowns himself emperor by 1804. He marches his armies across the continent, completely redrawing the map, right up until his ultimate defeat at Waterloo in 1815. So, in just 26 years, Europe goes from monarchy to republic to terror to a massive continental empire and right back to defeat. Talk about whiplash.
So, what happens next? While the victorious empires, Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, they get together at the 1815 Congress of Vienna to basically try and stuff that revolutionary genie back into the bottle. Their strategy was threefold. First, restore the old absolutist monarchies. Second, create a really careful balance of continental power so no single nation could ever dominate like France just did. And third, above all else, suppress any future democratic revolutions. They basically wanted to close their eyes and pretend 1789 never even happened.
But as we know, you really can't uninvent ideas. That brings us to Section 2, industry and nationalism. Nationalism, this right here is the core force that quietly started tearing those old multi-ethnic empires apart from the inside out. It's this powerful ideological belief that groups of people who share a common language, a shared history and culture should get to be an independent nation, free of foreign domination. It basically meant everyday people were no longer willing to accept being ruled by some foreign king sitting hundreds of miles away.
But you know, ideas alone don't change the world. They need fuel. And as Peacock's text points out, industrialization served as a massive catalyst for this. We aren't just talking about men in drawing rooms debating philosophy anymore. No, the relentless hum of the new factories actually provided the economic engine that funded these fervent cries for self-rule. The Industrial Revolution completely flipped the script on how people lived, how wealth was generated, and crucially, how wars could be fought.
And this sequence of events completely redrew the social fabric of Europe. First up, industrialization literally pulls peasants from the countryside into these incredibly dense urban working classes. And because everyone is now packed tightly together in these rapidly growing cities, those nationalist ideologies, they spread like wildfire through print media. Finally, all that built-up pressure explodes into armed revolts, successfully unifying entirely new states like Germany and Italy in the 1870s. This fundamentally shifted power away from the traditional kings and straight toward these highly efficient, newly unified nation-states. That careful balance of power crafted back in 1815, that was officially dead.
Which leads us to our third era, the Great Collapse.
Now, looking objectively at the source material, we see 3 distinct, highly incompatible forces clashing to fill the massive power vacuum left by those failing empires. You've got imperialism, pushing hard for colonial expansion and acquisition. Then there's communism, aiming for a classless society through a proletariat revolution. And finally, fascism, which leveraged extreme nationalism to achieve total totalitarian control. These ideologies were essentially locked in a continental cage match, setting the absolute perfect stage for global conflict on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
Over 70 million casualties. Just take a second to process that.
It is almost impossible to wrap your head around a number that massive, isn't it? It's a staggering figure that highlights the unimaginable human cost of Europe's collapse across 2 world wars. Those technological advances of the Industrial Revolution, the ones that had promised so much progress, they were instead turned toward creating absolute weapons of mass destruction.
And the macro impact of all this on the global stage was absolutely profound. Pre-World War I, traditional European empires were dominating globally. They were at their peak, but post-World War II, that dominance dropped practically to zero. The centuries-old imperial powers were completely bankrupted, their cities were literally reduced to rubble, and they had essentially dismantled their own global standing.
From those ashes, we enter our fourth and final era, the Iron Curtain.
So Europe, which was once the undisputed master of the globe, was now geographically and ideologically sliced cleanly in half by outside superpowers. On one side, you have Western Europe, featuring capitalist economies, shielded by the NATO military alliance, and firmly aligned with the USA. Then, on the exact opposite side of a very literal wall, you have Eastern Europe, running communist economies bound by the Warsaw Pact and completely aligned with the USSR.
So what you really need to take away from this stalemate is how the entire continent was essentially forced into this frozen equilibrium. For decades, peace wasn't being maintained by friendly diplomacy, it was maintained by the sheer, looming terror of mutually assured nuclear destruction. And because these superpowers couldn't fight directly in Europe without literally ending the world, they engaged in continual proxy conflicts abroad. Back home, there was rapid economic rebuilding, sure, but strictly within their divided spheres. Ultimately, this cemented a total loss of European global dominance. Europe was no longer the player, it was just the chessboard.
As Peacock's analysis comes to a close in 1980, we are left looking at this deeply, artificially divided continent, wondering, with the continent frozen in a Cold War, how long could the Iron Curtain actually hold? Because as history proves time and time again, pendulums never stay frozen forever. The cracks were already starting to form in the concrete, so the real question wasn't if the pendulum of power would swing back with earth-shattering force, but when, and who would be standing in its way. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. I'll see you next time.